back in the 1960s, I mean, science fiction in the cinema was, to use an expression of Dizzy Gillespie's, lower than whale shit. Mm. I mean, science fiction was, Mars Attacks, Saturday Morning Pictures for Kids, Flash Gordon, all that sort of nonsense.
Right.
And prior to the 60s, I mean, it didn't have a good genealogy in the cinema, with perhaps two or three exceptions. So science fiction was looked upon as something for kids and, not something terribly serious. So here was Stanley making this big film for MGM that was decidedly science fiction or futuristic. So at the beginning of the production, what he thought was needed. Now here was a film that was exploring the possibility of extraterrestrial life, flight to the stars and so on. So he felt that he needed to show that these were legitimate scientific concerns, mm-hmm. and that they weren't just nonsense, right? Mm-hmm. So what he did was he got Roger Karras, who was a sort of publicity chief who worked for him. He got Roger Karras to go around the world interviewing various scientists, astronomers, anthropologists, philosophers, a rabbi, and so on, and putting a number of questions to them about the possibility of extraterrestrial life and what it would mean to us were it to be discovered. So Roger went around the world, filming these interviews, and the idea was that Stanley would edit them down, and it would form a sort of prologue to the film. Mm-hmm. So people would, be sitting in the cinema, and before the film started, here were these clips of scientists, saying that these questions were a legitimate concern, were legitimate questions. But, as the film, the making of 2001 progressed, and the film got longer and longer, Stanley realized, A, there wasn't going to be the time to have this prologue, mm-hmm. and B, the film really had to stand on its own 2 feet anyway. So all these interviews, this proposed prologue was scrapped. And then, a couple of years after Stanley died, I thought, I should really dig out these interviews, because they would make a marvelous sort of extra features for a re-release, a DVD re-release of 2001. Mm-hmm. Now, I last saw all these 35mm cans of film on my desk at MGM Studios towards the end of 1968. Well, the thing is, I couldn't find them. I went to all the labs, the archives, and so on, and they seem to have disappeared off the face of the earth. Now, Stanley wouldn't have destroyed them, but God knows where they are. But what I did find was a transcript of all the interviews that had been done purely for editing purposes by Stanley's secretary, right? Mm-hmm. And, she wasn't familiar with, the scientific or technical terms, and just did a sort of hurried phonetic translation. So what I did was edit all of those interviews and footnote them and so on, and write an introduction, and that was what was published.
Okay.
Now, I think these interviews must exist somewhere, but they're probably sitting in some archive mislabeled. Mm-hmm.